The wagon wheels stopped grinding against stone, and the sudden silence pressed against Clara's ears like cotton. She clutched her canvas bag tighter, feeling the sharp corners of the marriage contract through worn fabric. The photograph of her mother lay beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, and at the very bottom, the silver locket that held nothing but a prayer. Windhill Station sat lonely against mountains that rose black-green into September sky. The building looked ready to blow away just planks and determination holding against the Wyoming wind. Dust swirled red around her boots as she stepped down, her eastern dress already collecting the earth of this place. He stood by the hitching post, broader than his photograph suggested, flannel shirt worn soft at the elbows, canvas pants that had seen real work. His hands were scarred from more than farming, one thumb crooked from an old break, knuckles marked by seasons of splitting wood and mending fence. When he removed his hat, his hair showed gray at the temples, though he couldn't be past 35. Miss Clara Henley. Yes, Josiah McKenna. He didn't smile, but his eyes weren't unkind. They were the color of creek water over stone. Journey wasn't too hard. No harder than staying would have been. He nodded like that made sense, took her bag without asking permission, but handled it careful. His own wagon waited solid built, with thick wheels meant for mountain roads. 2 horses, mismatched but healthy. Everything about him spoke of practical choices, things that would last rather than impress. The ride took them up, always up. The road wound through pines so thick they blocked the sun. He talked some about needing to get 3 more cords of wood split before snow, about the door frame that needed reinforcing, about the root cellar he dug but hadn't finished properly. Work talk, safe talk. The letter said you're from Baltimore. Was nothing there now. Family. Gone 2 winters back. Scarlet fever took my parents. Brother died at Antietam. He made a sound that might have been sympathy or just acknowledgement. They rode in silence until the trees opened onto a meadow. His cabin sat at the far edge, backed against more pines, with a view down the valley that made her chest tight with something between fear and hope. It's not much, he said. It's standing, that's something. The cabin was 1 main room with a loft, a lean-to addition that might become a proper room someday. But the logs were chinked tight, the roof looked sound, and smoke rose straight from the chimney. She'd lived in prettier places that offered less shelter. Inside smelled of pine sap and old smoke. A cast-iron stove dominated one corner. A table with 2 chairs sat beneath the single window, in the corner where morning light would fall. She saw what he hadn't mentioned in his letters, an empty room, door frame without a door, and visible through the opening, the skeleton of a crib, half assembled. He followed her gaze. Started that a while back. Haven't had cause to finish. She set down her bag, walked to the table, ran her fingers along wood worn smooth. Your letter was plain about what you want. Letters can't say everything proper. She turned to face him. He stood in his own doorway like he wasn't sure of his welcome. This man who'd paid her passage, who'd signed papers making her his intended, who'd built a space for children not yet dreamed of. The doctor in Baltimore said my womb sits wrong, tilted, said I might never quicken, and if I did, might not carry to term. His face didn't change. Doctors say lots of things. You have a right to know. Before. I know what I wrote. Know what you answered. He stepped inside, hung his hat on a peg. But words on paper aren't the same as standing here real. She waited. In Baltimore. Men had walked away from less. The aunt who'd taken her in after the fever had made it clear a barren woman was a burden, not a bride. Josiah moved to the stove, checked the fire, though it didn't need checking. What I meant to ask, what I should have asked different. He turned, met her eyes straight on. When the time comes, if it comes, will you want to try, will you want to raise what comes? However it comes, will you want to fill this house with voices besides our own? The question sat between them like a third presence. Not, will you give me sons, but, will you want what I want? Not a demand, but an invitation. "I came here," she said. "That's not an answer." "I sewed 3 baby gowns before I left Baltimore. They're in my bag, made from my mother's wedding dress." She lifted her chin. "I know they might never be worn, but I brought them anyway." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but a softening. "Root cellar needs proper shelving. Can't store vegetables on dirt." "I know how to build shelves. Chickens would be good come spring. Eggs and such. I kept chickens in Baltimore. Before." He nodded, moved past her to the empty room. "Thought this could be when there's need. If there's need. And if there isn't?" He considered. "Then it's a room. Storage maybe, or workspace. House needs what houses need." Outside, wind pushed through pines with a sound like water. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, showing dust motes dancing in the air. The cabin felt like held breath, like possibility waiting to take shape. "I should tell you," he said, still looking at the empty room. "I don't know much about the married parts. Was engaged once, before the war. She married my cousin while I was gone. Since then, just the work, just the land. We can learn. That simple?" "Nothing simple." Clara moved to stand beside him, looking at the half-made crib. "But we're here. That's a start." He did smile then, just barely. "There's rabbit stew keeping warm, bread from yesterday. You must be hungry." She hadn't realized it until he said so. He served the meal on tin plates, poured water from a pitcher that had been made by someone who cared about beauty, painted with small blue flowers. The only delicate thing she'd seen here. "Was my mother's," he said when he caught her looking. They ate without talking much. The stew was good, better seasoned than she'd expected. The bread was heavy but filling. Outside, the light faded from gold to purple. Night came different here than in Baltimore, not creeping between buildings but rolling down from the mountains like a river. "We'll marry proper when the circuit preacher comes through. 3 weeks, maybe 4. And until then, you'll have the loft. I'll bed down here. Need to get you proper furniture. But there's a good straw tick up there now. Clean." She nodded. Propriety even here, even with papers signed and passage paid. It said something about him, something that eased a knot she hadn't known she carried. "I rise early. 4, usually. Earlier in winter." "I know early." "Work here never stops. Season turns. Work changes, but never stops." "I didn't come for rest." He stood, started clearing plates. She moved to help, and their hands brushed, reaching for the same cup. Both pulled back, then reached again, more careful. She washed while he dried, finding the rhythm without words. The water was cold but soft. Must be good springs nearby. Full dark now. He lit a kerosene lamp, showed her the ladder to the loft. "There's water in the pitcher up there. Privy's out back. Lantern by the door if you need it." She climbed up, her bag bumping each rung. The loft was small but clean as promised. The straw tick had fresh sheets, rough but smelling of lye soap and sun. A small window looked out at stars so bright they hurt. Below, she heard him banking the fire, setting things ready for morning. The sounds of a man alone, used to his patterns. Soon those patterns would change, would include her rhythms too. The thought should have frightened her more than it did. She unpacked only what she'd need for morning, but pulled out one of the baby gowns, held it to the window where starlight made the white fabric blue. Such a small thing, such an enormous hope. "Clara," his voice came soft from below. "Yes?" "That question I asked, about wanting. I need you to know the answer matters, but not the way you might think. If you want to try, we'll try. If we fail, we'll grieve together. If children come some other way, orphan trains come through the territory. And if none come at all, then we'll be what we are. But I need to know you want to build something, whatever shape it takes." She folded the gown carefully, set it back in her bag. I want to build Josiah, whatever shape it takes. Then welcome home. The words settled into the cabin walls like they'd been waiting there all along. Outside, wind sang through pines. Inside, two people prepared for sleep in separate spaces, dreaming different versions of the same uncertain future. The half-made crib caught moonlight through the empty doorframe, waiting for hands to complete what hope had started. Clara pulled the rough blanket to her chin, listening to the house settle, learning its language. Tomorrow she'd begin the shelves, the chickens, the turning of his house into theirs. But tonight, she let herself believe in the possibility of voices yet to come, of small hands reaching for that silver locket, of stories told in this loft about a grandmother from Baltimore, and why sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the only home worth having. The mountain wind agreed, or seemed to, whispering promises through the pine boards that nothing was certain except morning would come, and with it, work enough for willing hands. The rooster's crow came before Josiah's footsteps, but only just. Clara had been awake, watching darkness thin outside the small window, learning the sounds of morning here, wood settling, wind shifting, the distant cry of something wild. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress, pinned her hair tight, and climbed down to find him feeding the stove. "Sleep come easy?" he asked without turning. "Easy enough." He showed her the kitchen workings where he kept flour in a tin to keep mice out, lard in a crock, salt pork wrapped in cloth. The sourdough starter lived in a brown jar, covered with cheesecloth, smelling alive and yeasty. Mother kept it going 15 years, been feeding it 7 more since she passed. Clara lifted the cloth, studied the bubbling mass. "Show me the proportions you use." They made bread together that first morning, not talking much, finding rhythm in the work. His hands knew the dough's feel, when it had been kneaded enough, how to shape loaves that would rise even. She watched, learned, adjusted her Eastern ways to this altitude where everything baked different. While bread rose, he took her outside, showed her the boundaries of their claim 160 acres backed against Forest Service land, with a creek cutting through the northwest corner. The chicken coop stood empty but solid. The barn held 2 horses, a milk cow, tools arranged neat on the walls. Spring comes. We'll plow the bottom field. Soil's good there, holds water better. What grows well? Potatoes, turnips, some corn if we're lucky. Beans. Nothing fancy survives the altitude. She nodded, already planning. A kitchen garden closer to the house. Herbs that might winter over if protected. Maybe rhubarb it liked cold. Back inside, the bread had crowned perfect. She slid it into the oven while he worked on something at the table. Wood shavings curled around his knife as he carved, but she couldn't see what. "There's mending," he said, nodding toward a basket in the corner. "If you're willing." She sat with his shirts and her needle while bread perfumed the cabin. His clothes told stories, tears from barbed wire, burns from spark-spitting fires, worn places where his body moved against work. She patched and darned, making small stitches that would hold. The bread came out golden, crackling as it cooled. They ate it warm with lard and the last of some berry preserve, and she saw pleasure flicker across his face. Better than mine ever comes out. Same ingredients, just different hands. That afternoon, he taught her the stove's moods, how the damper controlled heat, which wood burned hot or steady, where to set pans for even cooking. She learned the water came from a spring uphill. Gravity fed through pipes he'd laid himself. The privy had lime for covering. The root cellar stayed cool even in summer. "Tomorrow we'll go to town," he said over supper beans and salt pork she'd managed not to scorch. "Get supplies. Let folks know you're here." Town meant Gold Creek, 8 miles down the mountain. She'd need cloth for curtains, thread, maybe seeds if the store had any. Small ways to mark this place as tended by a woman's hand. That night, she heard him working below after she'd climbed to the loft. The rhythmic scrape of knife on wood. Occasional muttering when something went contrary, Whatever he carved, it mattered enough to steal from sleep. Days found their pattern. She rose when he did, made breakfast while he tended stock. Mornings went to inside work bread, washing, mending, the endless battle against dust and pine needles. Afternoons they worked together, him teaching her the land's demands, her learning which blisters would callous and which meant changing grip. He started a rocking chair the third night. She saw him sketching the design on brown paper, measuring boards he'd set aside to season. "Need something proper for sitting," was all he said. But she'd seen him glance at her when she perched on the hard kitchen chairs, sewing by lamplight. The trip to Gold Creek showed her the wider territory. Other homesteads dotted the valley, smoke rising from chimneys, clothes flapping on lines. The town itself wasn't much one main street. Wooden sidewalks, more horses than people. At Holcomb's Dry Goods, Josiah introduced her simple, "My intended, Miss Clara Henley, come from Baltimore." Mrs. Holcomb, wide as she was tall, looked Clara up and down. "Mail order." "Correspondence," Josiah corrected. Quiet but firm. "Well," Mrs. Holcomb's face softened slightly. "You'll need proper clothes. Those Eastern dresses won't last a season here." She helped Clara pick sturdy fabric, showed her the reinforced seaming mountain women used, added needles without being asked, good steel ones that wouldn't bend. "Circuit preacher comes through regular," she said while cutting cloth. "Father Miguel, he's called. Though he's Methodist, marries folks proper. No questions if the paperwork's right." "Our paperwork's right," Josiah said. They stopped at the feed store, the blacksmith, the small post office where Josiah had a letter waiting. He read it quick, folded it away, but not before Clara saw the government seal. "Pension business," he said, "from the war." She didn't push. Men carried things from that time, wounds that showed and ones that didn't. Back home, and she'd started thinking of it that way, she hung her Eastern dresses in the corner and started cutting out a work dress from the new fabric. Josiah worked on the chair, each piece shaped careful before assembly. They worked in companionable quiet, lamplight pooling between them. "You fought Union," she said, not quite a question. "Pennsylvania 48th, 3 years. My brother was Maryland's 2nd. Good regiment." "He thought so." Josiah set down his knife. "Lost many friends." "All of them. Brother was the last." "I'm sorry. Our Union and Maryland didn't always see eye to eye." "War's over. Been over. What matters is who's standing after." She nodded, went back to her sewing. He picked up his knife. The chair began to take shape, wide seat, high back, arms that would hold a person secure. A chair for rocking babies, though neither said so. Sunday came and they dressed better, though neither had proper church clothes anymore. He'd shaved careful, showed her how to heat water on the stove for washing. She'd pinned her mother's cameo at her throat, the single fine thing she still owned. "No church closer than Gold Creek," he said, "but we could read some, if you want." She did. They sat at the table while he read from a Bible soft with handling. His voice was good for reading, steady and low. She closed her eyes, let words familiar from childhood settle into this new place. After they walked the property boundaries, he showed her where he planned to build a proper barn, maybe a smokehouse, the second room that would make the cabin a house. She told him about Baltimore, carefully, just the good parts, street vendors singing their wares, ship's masts thick as forest in the harbor, the library where she'd spent afternoons before the war changed everything. "You miss it." "I miss who I was there, but that person's gone anyway." He understood. She could see it in how he nodded, how his hand went unconscious to his side where something hurt when weather changed. That night, she heard him stop working on the chair, heard him climbing, but he stopped at the ladder's top, head just above the loft floor. "Wanted to say you're doing fine, better than fine. House already feels different. Better." Before she could answer, he'd climbed back down, but warmth spread through her chest. Unfamiliar after so long. The second week, she learned to milk the cow Bessie. He called her, though the animal answered to nothing but grain bucket rattling. Her hands cramped at first, but she found the rhythm. Her forehead pressed against warm flank, milk singing into the pail. Josiah built shelves in the root cellar while she organized what stores they had. Potatoes in bins, onions hung in braids she made from their tops. They worked close in the small space, passing tools, holding boards, learning to move around each other without collision. "Cloth's coming loose," she said, touching the bandage around his thumb where he'd slipped with the saw. "It's fine." "It's not." She unwrapped it, cleaned the cut with water boiled and cooled, rewrapped it neat. His hand was heavy in hers, calloused and warm. When she finished, he flexed his fingers. "Testing." "Thank you." "It's what's needed." But something had shifted. That night, the chair was nearly done. She could see it would be beautiful in its simplicity, every line considered, every joint true. He'd started carving something into the headpiece, though she couldn't make out what. "Will you teach me?" she asked. "Carving." He looked up surprised. "You want to learn?" "I want to know how to make things, lasting things." He found her a piece of soft pine, showed her how to hold the knife, how to work with wood's grain instead of against it. Her first attempts were clumsy, but he was patient, guiding her hands when she let him. Father Miguel arrived the third week, riding a mule that looked older than creation. He was younger than expected, maybe 40, with Mexican features despite the Irish name. "Josiah McKenna," he said, dismounting. "Been wondering when you'd need me." They sat at the table while Father Miguel checked their papers. Clara served coffee and the last of her Baltimore tea cakes, hoarded in her bag for special occasion. "Everything seems in order. When would you like the ceremony?" "Soon as possible," Josiah said, then looked at Clara. "If that suits." "Tomorrow," she suggested. "Tomorrow," Father Miguel agreed. "I'll stay at Holcomb's tonight if you want to spread word." After he left, Josiah and Clara stood awkward in their own house. "We should tell folks," he said, "those that matter." They rode to 3 neighboring homesteads. The Svensons barely spoke English, but understood wedding and promised to come. Old man Turner said he'd bring his fiddle. The widow Marsh pressed a jar of honey into Clara's hands, whispered something about wedding nights that made Clara blush and Josiah find urgent business with the horses. That evening, Clara finished her new dress while Josiah completed the chair. She'd made the dress simple but added her mother's lace to the collar and cuffs, small beauty salvaged from before. "It's done," he said, setting the chair by the stove. "Needs oiling still, but done." She saw what he'd carved into the headpiece, a circle of vines and leaves. No beginning or end. What grew here made permanent in wood. "It's beautiful. It's sturdy. That's what matters. But," he ran his hand over the arms, "thought it should be yours. However things go, something that's just yours." She sat in it, testing. It held her perfect, rocked smooth and even. A chair for waiting, for working, for holding what might come. "Thank you." He colored, busied himself banking the fire. "Better get sleep. Tomorrow's a day." But she doubted either slept much. She lay in the loft, listening to him shift below, thinking how tomorrow would change everything and nothing. They'd still wake to work, still move careful around each other. But there'd be law between them then, and God's blessing. And maybe that would make the other things easier. The chair caught moonlight through the window, empty but waiting, like the crib in the unfinished room, like her hands that wanted to hold more than just hope. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow we begin proper. The morning of her wedding. Clara woke to frost on the window, and Josiah already gone to tend stock. She found coffee keeping warm on the stove and bread dough he'd started small considerations that said more than words. She dressed in the new dress with her mother's lace, pinned her hair careful, and was pressing her father's Bible when she heard wagons arriving. Mrs. Holcomb came first, arms full of late wildflowers. Every woman needs flowers on her wedding day, even if it's just mountain daisies and bunchgrass. The Svensson women followed, bringing embroidered linens they'd worked by lamplight. The widow Marsh had baked a cake with real sugar and eggs, precious as gold at this altitude. They filled the cabin with women's voices, hanging flowers from the rafters, spreading a cloth on the table that had probably crossed an ocean to get here. "You're thin as wire, Mrs. Holcomb pronounced, cinching Clara's waist. "But strong, that's what matters here." Gold Creek's tiny church smelled of pine resin and beeswax candles. Someone had swept clean. An old man Turner was already tuning his fiddle in the corner. The pews held maybe 20 souls, every neighbor who could make the ride. The shopkeepers who'd closed their doors for the occasion. Even Sheriff Daniels, wearing his badge polished bright. Josiah waited at the altar in a black coat she hadn't known he owned. His hair was slicked careful, his boots blacked, but his hands moved restless until he saw her. Then he went still, something in his face that made her forget the watching eyes. Father Miguel kept the service simple when he asked for the rings. Josiah produced 2 carved from pine temporary. He whispered until he could get gold ones from Denver, but Clara liked the wood circles better, made by his hands from trees that watched over their land. "Your vows," Father Miguel prompted. Josiah cleared his throat. "I promise to provide, protect, and persevere, to build with you, not over you, to speak truth even when it's hard, to never raise hand in anger or voice in cruelty, to make our home a shelter from the world's storms." Clara had practiced her words, but standing there, she spoke from somewhere deeper. "I promise to work beside you in all seasons, to be honest in word and deed, to make our house a home, our land fruitful as God allows, to stand with you through whatever comes, to try," her voice caught, but she pushed through, "to always try." Father Miguel blessed them in Latin and English and what might have been Apache. When Josiah kissed her, it was brief and careful, but his hand trembled where it touched her cheek. Old man Turner struck up a reel, and the church became something else, neighbors laughing, children chasing between pews, women setting out food on boards across sawhorses. Someone had brought corn whiskey, though Father Miguel pretended not to notice when the men stepped outside to share it. "Dance with your bride," the widow Marsh commanded Josiah. "I don't." "You do now." He was awkward at first, holding Clara like she might break, but Turner slowed the fiddle to something waltz-like, and they found a rhythm, her hand small in his other hand warm at her waist. Around them, other couples joined the Svenssons, spinning with practiced ease. Sheriff Daniels leading Mrs. Holcomb with surprising grace. "Doing all right?" Josiah asked quiet. "Yes. It's not much of a wedding. Back east. Back east is gone. This is real." He pulled her slightly closer, and she let him. The gift table held practical things, seed packets, preserved goods, a young rooster from the Svenssons, cloth from Holcomb's store. Sheriff Daniels had brought ammunition, which made Josiah nod approval. But the gift that mattered most came from the widow Marsh, pulled aside quiet while others danced. "Elodie Marsh," she said proper, though they'd met before. "I'm midwife hereabouts. Helped birth most every child in the valley." Clara's chest tightened. "Mrs. Marsh." "Elodie, and hush. I'm not asking your business. Just want you to know I'm here, whatever comes or doesn't. Sometimes women need women's knowledge, and I've got 40 years of it." She pressed a small bottle into Clara's hand tonic of some kind, dark and pungent. "Helps with the monthlies. Helps with other things too, settling things that need settling." Clara understood. "Thank you." "There's a doctor rides circuit too. Dr. Paulson. Good man. Trained in Chicago. Between him and me, we manage most troubles." As the sun slanted low, folks began leaving. Each woman hugged Clara, murmuring advice or blessing. The men shook Josiah's hand, clapped his shoulder, made jokes that turned him red. Soon it was just them and the empty church, flowers wilting in late afternoon heat. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Yes. The ride back was quiet, both aware of what came next. The cabin looked different somehow. Flowers from the church moved here, the wedding cloth still on the table, the cake under a dish towel. Evidence of community, of witnesses to their promise. Clara busied herself storing gifts while Josiah tended evening chores. She heard him talking low to the horses, taking longer than usual. When he came in, she had supper waiting, nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread, but he ate like it was feast food. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about tonight." She waited, hands tight on her coffee cup. "We've got time, no rush about things. Want you to feel settled first, safe." "And if I already do?" He looked up sharp, searching her face. "I'm not a child, Josiah, nor some eastern flower needing protection. I knew what I was agreeing to when I came." "Knowing and doing are different things." "Yes." She stood, began clearing dishes. "But we're married now, legal and blessed. Seems wrong to start with distance." He caught her hand as she reached for his plate. "You're sure?" "I'm nervous," she admitted, "but sure." His thumb moved across her knuckles, gentle as breathing. "I'll bank the fire." She climbed to the loft, changed into her nightgown with shaking fingers. Her mother had told her some things before the fever took her, and the widow Marsh's whispered advice helped fill gaps. But knowing and doing, as Josiah said, were different things. She heard him climbing, saw his head appear above the loft floor. He'd left the lamp below, so there was just moonlight. He sat on the tick beside her, still in his clothes, careful not to touch. "We can learn together," he said soft. "Take our time, get it right." "Yes." He kissed her then, different from the church kiss, slower, asking permission with each deepening. His hand stayed gentle, and when she touched the scar she'd noticed on his collarbone, he shuddered but didn't pull away. They were careful with each other, patient, finding what worked and what didn't. When he apologized for his inexperience, she hushed him with her mouth on his. When she tensed, he waited, murmuring questions against her skin until she could answer. After, they lay curved together, her back to his chest, his arm heavy across her waist. She could feel his heartbeat slowing, his breath stirring her hair. "All right," he asked. "More than—" He made a sound that might have been relief or contentment. "Should have built that second room already. Can't have you climbing that ladder much longer." She understood what he wasn't saying. "Elodie Marsh knows herbs, remedies." "Whatever you need, whatever helps." She turned in his arms, studying his face in the dimness. "It might not happen, Josiah, even with remedies, even with trying." "I know. Can you live with that truly?" He was quiet long enough that she feared the answer. "Then, today, watching you with the neighbors, seeing how the women took to you, the men respected you, Clara. You're already more than I hoped for. Children would be blessing added to blessing, but you're enough. This is enough." She kissed him for that, deep and sure. They loved again, less careful this time, learning what made the other gasp or groan. When they finally slept, it was tangled together, the narrow tick forcing closeness they might have been shy about in a larger bed. Clara woke to Josiah's hand spread protective across her belly. Though nothing grew there yet, the gesture made her throat tight. She covered his hand with hers, pressing it closer, making her own promise to try, to hope, to believe in their body's possibility. The rooster crowed. Josiah stirred, kissed her shoulder, then climbed down to start the day. But everything was different now, the sound of him moving below, the scent of him on the sheets, the soreness that said she was wife now, not just intended. She dressed and descended to find him making coffee, trying not to smile. When she touched his back in passing, he caught her hand, pulled her close, kissed her like they had time. They didn't. Cows needed milking, horses feeding, but they took the moment anyway. "We should thank folks," she said against his mouth. "For yesterday." Tomorrow. Today's ours." They worked together all day, but different touching when they passed. His hand on her waist while she cooked, her fingers in his hair when he sat to mend harness. The chair he'd made sat by the stove, and she noticed him watching when she settled into it with her sewing that evening. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "How right you look there. How I can't figure how the house stood empty of you before." "It wasn't empty. You were here." "That's not the same as filled." She understood. The cabin felt larger somehow, like their marriage had opened rooms that didn't exist in the structure's simple geography. Even the unfinished room with its waiting crib seemed less haunted, more patient. That night, they loved in the loft again. And she thought maybe this time, maybe. Josiah must have thought it too, because he held her after like something precious, whispering promises into her hair about the family they'd make. However it came to them. Outside, wind sang through pines, and the first snow of the season began to fall, blessing the roof that sheltered them, the walls that held them, the bed that knew their hope. The first real storm came in October, 3 weeks after the wedding. Clara woke to wind screaming through gaps she hadn't known existed, snow driving horizontal past the window. Josiah was already up, stuffing rags into cracks, the stove blazing but barely holding against the cold. "Need to teach you about the dampers," he said, not looking up from where he knelt by the stove. "Storm like this, everything matters." She dressed quickly, joined him on the floor. The stove had 3 dampers, one she knew, 2 hidden. He showed her how to read the fire's mood by its sound, how too much draw would burn their wood too fast, too little would smoke them out. "Feel here." He guided her hand to the pipe. "That vibration means it's pullin' right." The storm lasted 2 days. They couldn't reach the barn the first day Josiah strung rope from door to necessary places, fighting wind that tried to tear him loose. Clara watched from the window, heart hammering, until he stumbled back inside. Ice in his beard. Animals are fine, barn solid. But she heard the worry under his words. This was just October. What would January bring? She learned bread making in a cold kitchen, how to keep dough rising when the edges of the room froze. Trial and error, first loaves heavy as stones, second batch better. Third, almost right. Josiah ate every failure without complaint, but she saw him smile when the 4th batch rose golden and light. "My mother would test with a straw," he said, tapping the crust. "Listen for the hollow sound." "Show me." He stood behind her, his hand over hers on the bread knife, teaching the angle that gave clean slices. She leaned back into his warmth, and they stood that way longer than cutting bread required. When the storm cleared, he took her out with the rifle. Not for hunting yet, just targets. The Spencer repeater was heavier than she expected. He showed her how to brace it, cheek to stock, breathing steady. "Don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze like you're asking, not demanding." Her first shots went wild, but he was patient, adjusting her stance, teaching her to find the notch in the sight. When she finally hit the pine cone he'd set on a stump, he whooped like a boy. "Natural eye," he said. "Just needed to trust it." They practiced until her shoulder ached. That night, he rubbed liniment into the bruise blooming there, his fingers careful but thorough. She caught his hand, held it against her skin. "I want to see them," she said. "Your scars. All of them." He stilled. She'd felt them in the dark, ridged lines across his ribs, puckered stars on his back, but he always turned away from lamplight. Dressed before dawn. "They're not pretty. Neither is my tilted womb. We promised honesty." Slowly, he removed his shirt. The damage was worse than touch had suggested. Shrapnel scars constellated his left side. A saber cut ran from shoulder to chest. Burns mottled his back from when his regiment had been trapped in burning woods. She traced each mark, learning their stories without words. When she kissed the worst one, a twisted mass over his ribs, he shuddered. "Don't pity me. I'm grateful." "For what?" "Each scar means you survived, means you're here." He pulled her close then, held her like she might disappear. They made love slow and careful, mapping each other's damages and strengths. Later, she found him in the loft, going through a box she hadn't seen before. Inside, dirty sketches on camp paper, a medal tarnished black, letters tied with string. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, detailed drawings of furniture cradles, high chairs, toy horses. "Drew these in winter camp," he said quiet. 65 outside Petersburg. Couldn't stop thinking about what I'd build when I got home. One page showed a crib with spindles turned like candles, another a rocking horse with real hair for its mane. The detail was stunning, joints labeled, measurements noted, each piece drawn from multiple angles. "They're beautiful. They're dreams from a different man. That soldier thought he'd come home to marry, have a house full of babies, farm his father's land." He touched the saber scar. "But Mary married. Father sold the farm while I was gone, and the man who drew these, he didn't come home. Someone else did." Clara studied the drawings, seeing the hope in every line. "He came home, just took longer to arrive, and found me instead of Mary. You deserve better than some broke-down soldier's second chance. I deserve exactly what I chose, a man who draws cradles in winter camps, who builds rocking chairs without being asked, who teaches bread making like it's holy work." She repacked the box, careful. "Keep these. When the time comes, if it comes, we'll build from them." November brought different challenges. She learned to stretch their stores. One chicken became 3 meals. Bones boiled for broth. Coffee was gold. Sugar diamonds. She learned to sweeten with honey, stretch flour with potato, make do and make better. Josiah started the room addition despite the cold, working whenever weather allowed. She helped holding boards, passing tools, learning the rhythm of hammer and saw. Her hands roughened. Splinters became daily, but she liked the weight of real work. "Why now?" she asked, watching him frame the doorway. "Winter's hard building. Want it ready, just in case." She knew what he wouldn't say. He'd noticed her checking her monthly cloths, counting days, hoping. Each month's disappointment hit harder, though she tried to hide it. The widow Marsh rode up in late November, bringing herbs and blunt advice. "Tilted womb's not a death sentence," she said, examining Clara with practiced hands. "Seen plenty carry with worse, but helps to do things different." She explained positions, timing, herbs to brew. Some of it made Clara blush, but Elodie was matter-of-fact as discussing bread recipes. "Main thing is don't force it. Body gets scared of wanting too hard. Let it happen or not." Easier said than done. But Clara tried, focusing on daily work instead of monthly hope. December arrived with snow that stayed. They moved into winter rhythms, water hauled before it froze. Animals fed twice daily. Wood split endless. She learned to work in the cold, wearing Josiah's old coat over 2 shawls, men's gloves over her mittens. One evening, she found him in the barn working on something covered with canvas. When she pecked, she saw the beginning of the rocking horse from his drawings. "Christmas," he said, shy. "Thought even if, well, someday there'll be children here, ours or others, should have toys waiting." She kissed him there in the cold barn, tasting hope on his lips. They decorated for Christmas with pine boughs and ribbons from her sewing basket. She made him a shirt from the last of her good fabric. He gave her the rocking horse, painted black with white spots, real horsehair for mane and tail. "It's perfect," she said, running her hands over its smooth back. "It's early, but I wanted you to know I'm not giving up, not on any of it." Christmas night. They loved in their bed. He'd finished the room, moved their things down from the loft. The new space smelled of fresh wood and possibility. After, lying beneath quilts while snow whispered against windows. Clara felt something shift inside, not physical deeper, like hope taking root despite the tilted ground. "Tell me about your mother," she said. He talked about a woman who sang while she worked, who could make soup from stones, practically, who'd taught him that hands were for building, not breaking. Clara told him about her mother reading poetry while bread baked, hiding coins in books for Clara to find, insisting on beauty even when they had little. They would have liked each other. Clara said, "Would have fought over grandchildren." Josiah agreed, then caught himself. "I mean, I know what you mean. And yes, they would have." January came harsh. The thermometer dropped so low the mercury disappeared. They lived close to the stove, sleeping in the main room, the bedroom too cold. But there was sweetness in the closeness, reading together by firelight. Her teaching him poetry she'd memorized. Him teaching her to whittle small animals from pine scraps. One morning, feeding chickens in the brutal cold, Clara found one of the hens dead. She carried it inside, fighting tears that seemed too big for one bird. "It's the cold," Josiah said, gentle. "Not your fault. Everything dies here. Everything dies everywhere. But look," he pointed out the window where the other chickens pecked at scattered grain. 5 still standing. That's winning in winter." She plucked the dead hen, made soup that lasted 3 days. Nothing wasted, everything used. That was the mountain way, death feeding life. Ending becoming beginning. February thawed enough for a trip to town. At Holcomb's, buying flour and salt. Clara overheard women talking about the Svensson girl pregnant again. 3rd baby in 4 years. "Fertile as a rabbit," one said, not unkind but thoughtless. Clara left quick, but Josiah had heard. He found her behind the store, face turned away. "Clara." "I'm fine." "You're not." She turned on him. "She has three, and I can't even—" She stopped, ashamed of the bitterness. He pulled her against him, right there where anyone could see. "Takes time. We've only been trying since October." "What if time doesn't help? What if I'm broken permanent?" "Then we're broken together. That's what marriage means." She cried into his coat while he held her, his chin on her head, his arms a wall against the world's harsh truths. That night, he showed her the other drawings from his soldier's box plans for a schoolhouse, a church, a whole town built from hope and measurements. "Wasn't just about my own children," he explained. "Was about building something that lasted past me. We can do that, Clara, with or without babies. We can build something that matters." She studied the drawings, seeing the same careful hope that went into the rocking horse, the chair, their slowly growing house. "Teach me," she said, "to build, really build, not just hold boards." So he did. Through the last weeks of winter, he taught her joints and angles, how to read wood grain, how to know when something would hold. Her first project was a simple box, corners uneven but solid. Her second was better. By the third, she was planning her own design shelves for the kitchen, a cradle for eggs, a frame for her mother's photograph. March arrived with mud and promise. The thaw came slow, revealing the land's bones. They walked the property, planning where to put the garden, how to expand the chicken coop, whether to try fruit trees. "Apple might make it," he said. "Cherry too, the tough kind." "We'll try both." They ordered seedlings from a catalog, along with garden seeds and new needles for Clara's worn-out supply. When the package arrived in April, it felt like Christmas again. But the best gift came a week later, when Clara's monthly failed to arrive. She waited another week, afraid to hope. When Elodie came for a regular visit, she confirmed it with gentle hands and a knowing smile. "About 6 weeks along, I'd say due somewhere around Christmas." Clara couldn't speak. Josiah went white, then red, then grabbed Clara so tight she squeaked. "Careful," Elodie warned. "She's not China, but she's carrying precious." That night, they lay in bed with his hand spread over her still flat belly. both afraid to speak, as if words might break the spell. Finally, Clara whispered, "It might not last." "It might not," he agreed. "But right now, it is. That's enough for tonight." Outside, spring wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of growing things, of earth ready for seed, of hope taking root in ground that had seemed too damaged to bloom. The morning sickness came with the last frost of April. Clara barely made it to the porch before heaving, Josiah holding her hair back, murmuring words she couldn't parse through the misery. But when she straightened, wiping her mouth, they both smiled like fools. "It's real," she whispered. "Getting more real by the day," he agreed. Helping her inside, she spent May learning her body's new rules. Mornings belonged to sickness, but afternoons she felt strong enough to work the garden. The smell of coffee turned her stomach, but she craved pickled cabbage, something fierce. Josiah rode to town special for vinegar and dill. They didn't tell anyone yet. Superstition, maybe, or just wanting to hold the secret close. But Clara caught him building in the barn small things, careful things. A cradle taking shape from pine boards, tiny clothes pegs for a line strung low. June brought wildflowers and quickening. The first flutter felt like butterfly wings, so gentle she thought she'd imagined it. But it came again at supper, stronger. "Oh," she gasped, hand to her belly. Josiah dropped his fork. "What is it? Are you—" "Feel?" She guided his hand to the spot. They waited, breathing shallow, until it came again, the smallest movement, but undeniable. His eyes went wet. "That's our child?" "That's our child," she confirmed. They told the neighbors at the July social. Clara's dress no longer hiding the swell. The women surrounded her immediately, hands reaching to feel, advice flowing like water. The men clapped Josiah's back, made jokes about mountain air being good for more than lungs. Elodie checked her over, proclaimed everything right as could be. Baby sitting proper, heartbeat strong, that tilted womb's doing just fine. But August brought blood, just spotting at first, then more. Clara took to her bed, terrified with each cramp that everything was ending. Josiah sent for Elodie, who came with Dr. Paulson, the circuit doctor on his monthly rounds. "Bed rest, doctor," Paulson ordered after examining her. "Complete rest. Body's warning you to slow down. But the garden, the preserving, we'll wait or get done without you." Elodie said firm, "This baby won't wait." So Clara stayed in bed while the world worked around her. The neighbor women came in shifts, Mrs. Svensson teaching her Norwegian knitting, the widow Marsh reading from her Bible, Mrs. Holcomb bringing town gossip that made the days pass easier. Josiah worked dawn to dark, trying to do his work and hers. She watched him from the window cutting hay, mending fence, hauling water. At night he'd collapse beside her, hands blistered, back aching, but always asking about the baby first. "Still moving?" she'd assure him. "Still fighting." September came cool and Clara felt stronger. The bleeding had stopped. Baby tumbling regular as clockwork. Doctor. Paulson allowed her up for short periods enough to cook simple meals. Do small mending. She was piecing a baby quilt when she heard horses. Through the window, she saw a man in city clothes dismounting, another staying mounted, official-looking men with official-looking papers. Josiah met them in the yard. She couldn't hear words, but saw his posture change, shoulders squaring, chin lifting, the stance of a soldier. They left after an hour. Josiah came inside, face carved from stone. "Land office made an error," he said, careful. "Recorded our claim wrong. Someone's contesting it." "Who?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is we might lose it all if we can't prove continuous occupation and improvement." Clara stood, one hand supporting her belly. "We've been here. We've built, planted, worked." "I know. But law wants papers, witnesses, proof." He slumped in his chair. "Hearings in October. If we lose, We won't lose. She moved to him, took his face in her hands. This is our land, our home. Our child will be born here. But she saw the fear in his eyes. Without the land, they had nothing. No way to support a child, no place to raise one. October arrived with golden aspens and legal summons. The hearing would be in Gold Creek, before a territorial judge. They'd need witnesses to their improvements. Proof of continuous residence. I'll write to everyone, Clara said. Every neighbor, every merchant we've dealt with. She wrote until her hand cramped. Josiah riding out to deliver letters. The responses came quick. Yes, they'd testify. Yes, they'd seen the improvements. Yes, the McKennas had been there since last September, working the land honest. The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. The baby rolled and kicked, responding to her anxiety. Josiah pulled her close, hand gentle on her belly. Whatever happens, we'll manage. I don't want to manage. I want to raise our child here, in this house you built, on this land we've worked. Then we fight for it. The courtroom was packed. Clara recognized most faces' neighbors, townfolk, even some strangers. The man contesting sat with a Denver lawyer, papers spread before them like weapons. The lawyer argued technicalities, survey errors, filing dates, improvement requirements. He produced witnesses Clara didn't recognize, men who swore the land had been vacant when they'd passed through. Then their witnesses spoke. Old Man Turner described helping raise the barn. Mrs. Holcomb had receipts for every supply bought. The Svensons, through an interpreter, told about shared fence lines, traded labor, borrowed tools. But the moment that turned things came from Sheriff Daniels, who stood slow and pulled out a different paper. Federal investigation report, he said. These witnesses, Mr. Fancy Lawyer, brought their known claim jumpers. Been running the same scheme in 3 territories? The judge's face darkened. Within an hour, he'd ruled the McKenna claim was valid. The contestants guilty of fraud. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Outside, neighbors surrounded them. Men shook Josiah's hand. Women kissed Clara's cheeks. The baby kicked hard, like it too was celebrating. That night, home safe, they sat by the fire in quiet victory. The land was theirs, legal and clear. Their child would be born to property, to inheritance, to something that lasted. We did it, Clara said. You did it, those letters, getting everyone there. We did it, she repeated. That's what marriage is. November passed quiet, Clara growing heavier, moving slower. She nested like a bird, washing and rewashing baby clothes, arranging and rearranging the cradle. Josiah finished the second room, completely plastered walls, real glass window, a door that closed snug. The first real labor pains came in early December, 2 weeks before expected. Clara had been picking up eggs when the cramping started different deeper, radiating around to her back. It's time, she told Josiah when he came for lunch. His face went white. But it's early. The babies come when they come. He rode for Elodie like the devil was chasing him. Clara walked the house, breathing through contractions, trying to stay calm. The pains were coming regular now, strong enough to stop her mid-step. Elodie arrived with her bag of mysteries, took one look at Clara, and started giving orders. Water boiling, clean cloths, whiskey if you have it. For the pain. For your husband. He's about to pace a groove in your floor. Labor lasted through the night. Clara had helped with birthings back in Baltimore, but being the one laboring was different, overwhelming, primal. Like her body had taken control and she was just along for the ride. Josiah stayed close, letting her grip his hands through the worst pains, wiping her face with cool cloths, never flinching when she cursed him for getting her into this state. You're doing fine, Elodie kept saying. Baby's coming just right. Dawn was breaking when the final pains came. Clara bore down with strength she didn't know she had, Josiah behind her for support. Elodie guiding, encouraging. Then a cry, thin and angry and absolutely perfect. "A son," Elodie announced, placing the wet, squalling bundle on Clara's chest. Small but breathing fine. Clara couldn't see through her tears. The baby was tiny, maybe 5 pounds, but his color was good, his cry strong. Dark hair like Josiah's, a chin that already looked stubborn. "A son?" Josiah whispered, touching the baby's head with one finger, like he might break. "We have a son." They named him James, after Clara's father, James William McKenna. He latched to Clara's breast like he'd been doing it forever, and she felt something fierce rise in her love beyond words. Protective instinct that would kill or die for this tiny person. But the bleeding wouldn't stop, not hemorrhaging, but steady, worrying. Elodie's face grew serious. "Sometimes happens with early babies," she said. "We'll watch close." For 3 days, Clara bled. Weak, she could barely nurse. Josiah held the baby to her, helped position him, changed and cleaned him when she couldn't rise. The neighbor women came with food, took turns sitting up so Josiah could sleep. Dr. Paulson arrived on his rounds, examined her thorough. The afterbirth didn't come complete, body's trying to expel what's left. He gave her bitter tea that caused cramping so bad she sobbed. But finally, her body released what it had been holding. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Crisis passed. "Dr. Paulson announced. But no more babies for a good while. Body needs time to heal proper." Clara nodded, too tired to speak. She had James. If he was all they ever had, it was enough. More than enough, it was miracle. Christmas came with Clara still weak but improving. James had gained weight, his cheeks rounding out, his cry stronger. Josiah had carved him a rattle from pine, smooth as silk. They sat by the fire Christmas evening, James sleeping between them in the cradle Josiah had built. The rocking horse waited in the corner for when he was older. "He's perfect," Clara said. "He is. But," she struggled for words, "if he's our only, then he's our only, and we'll love him enough for 10. She leaned against him, watching their son sleep. Outside, snow fell soft, blanketing the world in fresh white. Inside, the fire crackled, the baby breathed, and 2 people who'd started as strangers held their miracle between them. "Next Christmas," Josiah said. "He'll be walking, getting into everything. The Christmas after, talking. The one after that, asking for presents." They built future Christmases in words, each one bright with this small life they'd made against all odds. The tilted womb hadn't mattered. The early birth hadn't stopped him. James William McKenna was here, alive, theirs. In the middle of the night, James woke hungry. Clara nursed him while Josiah kept the fire going, the 3 of them in a circle of warmth while winter prowled outside. This was what they'd built toward, not just walls and roof, but family. Not just hope, but the weight of a baby in their arms. "Thank you," Clara whispered to Josiah over James's downy head. "For what?" "For asking the right question. Not, will you give me sons, but will you want what I want? For seeing past the broken parts to what could be." He kissed her forehead, then James's. "We're all broken some way, but look what we made from the pieces." James finished nursing, milk drunk and content. Clara passed him to Josiah, who held him like spun glass, whispering promises about teaching him to ride, to shoot, to build. Clara added her own silent promises to read to him, teach him letters, show him there was a world beyond these mountains, even if this was home. Together, they faced the winter night. No longer 2 but 3, their family small but complete, their love large enough to fill any empty spaces that might come. Spring came late that year. James, nearly 4 months old when the first thaw started. Clara was hanging wash when she saw the rider approaching expensive coat, Eastern hat, horse too fine for mountain roads. Her stomach dropped before she recognized him. Richard Thornton. The man her aunt had wanted her to marry in Baltimore. The man who'd called her damaged goods when he learned about her tilted womb. "Clara," he said, dismounting smooth as city butter. "You're looking, well." She stood straight, aware of her patched dress, her rough hands. James was napping inside, and she stepped subtle between Richard and the door. "Sss, Mr. Thornton, you're far from Baltimore. I've business interests in Denver now. Mining investments." He looked around the homestead, his expression carefully neutral. "I heard you'd married some frontier farmer." "Josiah McKenna, my husband." "Yes, I've been making inquiries." He pulled papers from his coat. "Interesting thing about frontier marriages. Often irregular. Documentation problems. Our marriage is legal." "Perhaps, but there are questions. Your aunt never gave proper consent. You were still her ward when you left." Clara's hands fisted in her apron. "I was 23, no ward at that age." "The courts might see it different, especially if someone were to present evidence of incapacity, mental strain from your parents' deaths. That doctor's report about your condition." From inside, James started crying. Clara's body responded immediately, milk letting down, but she didn't move. "What do you want?" Richard smiled, the expression she'd once thought handsome now looking like a snake's. "I've done well in Denver, but society there values certain things. A wife from good Eastern stock, children to carry on the name. I'm married. Marriages can be annulled, especially if the woman was coerced, desperate, not in her right mind when she agreed." He stepped closer. "I could give you a real life. Clara, servants, proper doctors, schools for the child." "Leave now." "I'll be in Gold Creek for a week. The Imperial Hotel. Think about it. Think about what's best for your son." He mounted and rode off, leaving Clara shaking. She gathered James, held him close, his warm weight the only thing keeping her anchored. When Josiah came in for supper, she told him everything. His face went dark as she talked, hands clenching and unclenching. "He threatened you." "Not exactly, but he has money, lawyers." "We have our marriage certificate, witnesses." "Do we have enough?" Josiah was quiet a long moment, then stood. "I need to go to town." "Now it's near dark." "Now." He returned past midnight with Sheriff Daniels and Father Miguel. They sat around the table while Clara made coffee with shaking hands. "Thornton's been asking questions, all right," the sheriff said. "Offering money for information about your marriage, your claim, anything that might be used legal-wise." "Can he do that?" Clara asked. "Money talks loud in the territories." Father Miguel said, "But so does community. Tomorrow is Sunday. Come to service. Bring James." Clara didn't understand, but they went. The small church was fuller than usual, news traveling the way it did in small places. When Father Miguel called them forward after the sermon, Clara's knees nearly buckled. "Friends," Father Miguel said, "we have among us a family that might need our Christian support. The McKennas, married before God and this congregation, confirmed in their land claim by federal judgment, raising their son in faith and honest work." Old man Turner stood. "I was at their wedding, witnessed it legal." Mrs. Holcomb rose. "I've seen every receipt, every improvement, no better neighbors in the valley." One by one, people stood, testifying to what they'd witnessed: the marriage, the claiming of land, the birth of James. By the end, even the Svensons were standing, not understanding all the English, but knowing solidarity when it was needed. Then Judge Harwick, who'd ruled on their land claim, entered. Clara hadn't seen him arrive. "Heard there might be legal questions about the McKenna marriage?" he said loud enough for all to hear. "I've reviewed the documentation. Everything is in perfect order. Any attempt to challenge it would be inadvisable." Monday morning, Richard appeared at their door with a lawyer from Denver. The man was thin, sharp-featured, with eyes that counted everything. "Mrs. McKenna," the lawyer started, but Josiah stepped forward. "My wife, on my land. You'll speak respectful or not at all." The lawyer adjusted his approach. "We're prepared to offer significant compensation for your cooperation in dissolving this marriage." "No." "Mr. McKenna, perhaps you don't understand the full—" "I understand plenty." Josiah's voice was quiet, dangerous. "I understand you're trying to buy my wife like she's property. I understand you think money makes you right. The lady's aunt has provided concerning documentation about her mental state." "The lady's aunt," Clara interrupted, "threw me out when she learned I couldn't guarantee children. Whatever she said is lies born of spite." Richard stepped forward. "Clara, be reasonable. Look at this place. Look at what you've become. You were meant for better." "I am better than I ever was in Baltimore, waiting for approval from people who saw me as breeding stock." James started crying. Clara didn't hesitate, unbuttoned her dress and put him to breast right there. The lawyer looked away, scandalized. Richard's face twisted with disgust. "You see," she said to them, "this is what I am, a frontier wife, a mother. My hands are rough from real work. I smell of baby milk and wood smoke. I married a man who sees me whole, not as damaged goods." Sheriff Daniels arrived then, not alone. With him came Judge Harwick and a federal marshal who'd been passing through. "Gentlemen," the marshal said to Richard and his lawyer, "I've been reviewing some interesting documents. Seems there's questions about your mining claims. Mr. Thornton, paperwork irregularities." Richard went pale. "That's not—" "And you, counselor," Judge Harwick added, "practicing law in the territory without proper territorial license. That's a serious matter." The lawyer started to protest, but the marshal cut him off. "You can leave now, peaceful, or we can discuss these matters in detail. Your choice." They left. Richard turned back once, his face ugly with rage. But whatever he saw in Josiah's eyes made him keep riding. That night, Clara shook like she had fever. Josiah held her and James both, rocking them in the chair he'd made. "It's over," he kept saying. "They're gone." But Clara knew Richard's type. He'd try again. Different angle. More money. Better lawyers. The answer came from unexpected quarters. 3 days later, Mrs. Holcomb arrived with a telegram from Baltimore. Clara's aunt was dead sudden illness. No will. As closest living relative. Clara inherited what little was left after debts. "Not much, Mrs." Holcomb said, reading the details. "But there's this your parents' marriage certificate, your birth certificate, a doctor's statement that you were of sound mind when you left Baltimore." Clara laughed, sharp and bitter. "She kept them after everything. Guilt, maybe, or insurance. Doesn't matter now. They're yours." The papers were what mattered. Proof that no one had authority over her. That she'd left Baltimore free and clear. That her marriage was her choice. But Richard wasn't done. A week later, Josiah found fence cut, cattle wandering. Someone had poisoned the creek upstream, not enough to kill, but the animals got sick. Then came the fire that almost took the barn, caught just in time. "He's trying to break us," Josiah said, exhausted from another night watching. "Let him try." The community responded without being asked. Men took turns watching the property. Women brought food so Clara and Josiah could focus on protecting what was theirs. The Svensson boys slept in the barn, rifles ready. Then Federal Marshal Hayes returned, this time with more men in chains. "Richard Thornton's under arrest," he announced. "Fraud, attempted arson, conspiracy to violate the Homestead Act. Man he hired to burn your barn turned witness." Clara felt her knees give. Josiah caught her, held her up. "There's more," the marshal continued. "His mining claims were all fraud. He owes thousands. Won't be bothering anyone for a long time." The trial was in Denver. Clara had to testify, taking James with her because he was still nursing. She sat in the witness box, telling the truth clear how Richard had rejected her in Baltimore, how he'd tried to buy her back like lost property, how he'd threatened everything they'd built. The jury took less than an hour. Guilty on all charges. 10 years hard labor. As they led Richard away, he looked at Clara once. She met his eyes steady. James in her arms. Josiah beside her. This was her family. This was her choice. And no amount of Eastern money or city power could change that. The ride home was quiet. James slept against Clara's chest. Josiah's arm around them both. The mountains rose clean and sharp against skies so blue it hurt. "We won," Josiah said finally. "We survived," Clara corrected. "That's different." "How?" "Winning means beating them at their game. Surviving means living our own game, by our own rules." Back home, neighbors had tended everything. Garden weeded, animals fed, wash done and folded. On the table, a cake from Mrs. Holcomb with welcome home in careful frosting. That night, after James was asleep, Clara and Josiah stood on their porch looking at their land legally theirs, twice defended, bought with sweat and determination. "No one can take this from us now," Josiah said. "No one ever could. They could take the paper that says it's ours, but not what we built, not the roots we've put down." He pulled her close. "When I wrote that advertisement, I never imagined—" "What, that you'd get a woman too stubborn to be run off?" "That I'd get you, exactly you." They went inside, to their house that had weathered storms, both natural and man-made, in his cradle. James stirred, but didn't wake. The fire settled in the stove. Outside, owls called across the darkness, and wind sang through pines that had seen it all and kept standing. This was home, not because paper said so, but because they'd chosen it, fought for it, bled for it, and now, finally, they could just live in it. Clara picked up her sewing, a new shirt for James who was growing so fast. Josiah opened his almanac, planning next year's planting. Simple evening work, but sacred in its ordinariness. This was what they'd protected, not just land, but the right to these quiet moments. This gentle life built from rough materials and determination. Tomorrow there would be work, always work. But tonight, they were home, safe, together. And that was worth more than all the golden promises Richard Thornton's money could have bought. Summer came full and golden. James crawling everywhere, pulling himself up on furniture, babbling sounds that almost made words. Clara watched him explore, her monthly blood arriving regular as clockwork despite the herbs Elodie brought, the positions she suggested, the hope that never quite died. "Give your body time," Elodie said during a visit. "That birth was hard. Sometimes the womb needs seasons to ready itself again." But Clara saw how other women looked at her missus. Svensson with her 4th baby coming. Young Mrs. Turner married just last year and already showing. One child was blessing, but one child was also question would there be more. Josiah never asked, never pushed, but she caught him sometimes watching James with an expression that held both joy and sorrow. Their son would grow up alone. No brothers to share chores, no sisters to tease. Then came the letter from Gold Creek's postmaster. There'd been a mining accident 2 valleys over. Cave-in, 3 men dead, 2 of them leaving widows and children. 7 children between them. The postmaster said, oldest boy's maybe 12, trying to hold it all together. Clara and Josiah rode out the next day. James strapped to Clara's back. The mining camp was everything their homestead wasn't temporary. Harsh, built for taking rather than growing. The 2 widows sat surrounded by children, faces blank with shock. The oldest boy, Tom, stood apart, shoulders trying to be broader than his years allowed. "We don't need charity," he said when Josiah approached. "Not offering charity, offering work." Clara knelt by the younger children, a girl maybe 8, twin boys around 6, 2 little ones barely past toddling. They stared at her with hollow eyes until James babbled and reached for them. The smallest girl almost smiled. "What kind of work?" Tom asked. Suspicious. "Ranch work, farm work, housework for those old enough, food and shelter for all." One of the widows, Mrs. Patterson, looked up sharp. "You'd take all 7. "We've got room building. Could use the help." It was partly true. They could use help, but mostly, Clara saw herself in these children orphaned, unwanted, about to be scattered to whoever would take them or none at all. The widows were heading back east to family who might take them, but not 7 extra mouths. The children would go to the territorial orphanage, be parceled out to whoever needed labor. "We'll take the oldest 3. Mrs. Turner said when word spread. "Need help with harvest." "Could use the twins," another neighbor offered. "Old enough to work." Clara watched the children huddle closer, the older ones gripping the younger. "They should stay together." "That's not practical, Mrs." Turner started. "We'll take them all," Clara said firm, "temporary or permanent, however it works legal." Josiah looked at her, and she saw him understand. They'd wanted to fill their house with voices. Here were voices needing a house. It took a week to sort papers. The widows signed guardianship over grateful and guilty. The territorial judge brought special, made it legal with witnesses and seals. "You sure about this?" Judge Harwick asked private. 7 children's a lot." "We're sure," Josiah answered, while Clara held the youngest girl who hadn't let go since she'd picked her up. They came home like a parade wagon full of children and what little they owned. Tom rode up front with Josiah, trying to look like he wasn't scared. The middle children packed in the back, the youngest girl, Ruth, in Clara's arms with James. The homestead looked different through children's eyes. Clara saw them catalog solid walls, glass windows, smoke from the chimney meaning warmth and food. "Where do we sleep?" the 8-year-old. Margaret asked Small. "Tonight, we'll make pallets by the fire. Tomorrow, we start building proper spaces." Tom straightened. "I can build. Pa taught me." "Good. We'll need every hand." That first night was chaos. 7 children plus James, all needing food, washing, sorting. The twins Samuel and Daniel wouldn't speak. The middle girl, Margaret, tried to mother everyone. 5-year-old Peter wet himself, ashamed. Ruth wouldn't eat until Clara spooned the same mush into James first, proving it safe. Josiah took the boys to the barn, giving them space from female fussing, showing them tools and animals, letting them claim corners for themselves. Clara settled the girls, making beds from every blanket they owned, singing low until exhaustion took them. Late, very late. Clara and Josiah sat on the porch while children slept inside like puppies in a pile. 7, he said, wonder in his voice. Too many. Maybe, but did you see Tom's face when I showed him the saw? And Margaret humming while she helped with dishes? They're wounded. It'll take time. We have time. But time moved fast with 9 mouths to feed. The garden that had seemed abundant looked small. The root cellar's stores dwindled quick. Josiah butchered a cow they'd meant to keep, started hunting more, fishing the creek aggressive. The children worked, even the small ones. Tom proved good as his word, helping frame the addition that would be a bunk room. Margaret took over kitchen duties she could manage, freeing Clara for heavier work. The twins slowly started talking, mostly to each other, but sometimes to the horses. Peter followed Josiah like a shadow, learning by watching. Ruth attached to Clara fierce, but helped with James, playing with him while Clara worked. The adoption papers came through in September, making it official. The children were theirs, legal as if born to them. Clara signed with a steady hand, though her heart raced. 7 children, 8 with James, from empty house to overflowing in one summer. Not everyone approved. Some neighbors whispered about taking on more than they could handle, about bloodlines and bad blood from mining stock. But others helped clothes appeared on their porch, preserved food, an old McGuffey reader for teaching letters. October brought news that made Clara's heart skip. One of the mining widows had returned, remarried, wanting her children back. "Just the twins," she said, standing in their door with her new husband. "My boys." Samuel and Daniel hid behind Clara. They'd finally started talking regular, laughing even. Now they pressed against her legs, trembling. "You signed papers," Josiah said quiet. "I was grieving, not thinking clear." "And now?" The woman's new husband spoke up. "We've got our own place now. Proper home, blood should be with blood." Clara knelt, gathering the twins close. They'd filled out these past months. Brown from sun, strong from good food and steady work. "Boys, what do you want?" Samuel, the bolder twin, looked at the woman who'd birthed him. "You left us." "I had to, but now." "You left us," Daniel echoed. "Ma Clara didn't." The woman's face crumpled. Her new husband's went hard. "They're her son's legal." "They're our son's legal," Josiah corrected. "Papers signed and sealed. You want to challenge it? We'll meet you in court with 7 children testifying where they want to be." The woman looked at her boys once more. They pressed closer to Clara, and she left crying, her husband pulling her along. That night, the twins crawled into Clara and Josiah's bed. Something they'd never done. "You won't send us away," Samuel whispered. "Never," Clara promised. "You're ours now, all of you." "Even if you get more babies?" Daniel asked. Clara's throat closed. Josiah answered, "Even if, always." But more babies seemed unlikely. Her womb stayed empty despite trying, despite hope. Doctor Paulson visited in November, examined her gentle. "Sometimes bodies know their limits," he said. "You nearly died with James. Your body might be protecting itself." "Or protecting me," Clara said, watching through the window as Josiah taught Tom and Peter to split wood. Margaret helping Ruth and James build snow figures. The twins hauling water. 8 children might be my limit anyway. 8 children is most folks' miracle. She knew he was right. But still, sometimes, she grieved the babies she wouldn't bear, the children who wouldn't have Josiah's eyes or her stubborn chin. December came with heavy snow and Christmas preparations. The children had never had proper Christmas mining camps, didn't celebrate much. Clara and Josiah determined to make it memorable. Tom and Josiah cut a tree, dragged it home through snow. The children strung it with popcorn and dried berries. Paper stars cut from old letters. Clara taught Margaret to make gingerbread. The boys carved whistles for gifts. Christmas Eve. They all packed into the church for service. Their pew that had once held 2 now overflowed with children. Clara and Josiah bookending them like walls. People stared, some approving, some not. But Clara didn't care. This was their family, strange-built but solid. Christmas morning brought simple gifts, new mittens, hair ribbons, a knife for Tom who was becoming a young man too fast. But the best gift was watching Ruth laugh full belly at James's antics. Hearing the twins sing carols they'd learned. Seeing Margaret mother everyone with gentle hands. Watching Peter and Tom wrestle in the snow like the boys they still were. "Our house is full," Josiah said that night, children finally asleep. Floor covered with pallets and blankets. Fuller than we imagined. Different than we imagined. Clara looked at the cradle, still in their room, where James slept peaceful. The rocking horse waited in the corner, too small now for the older children, but perfect for James and Ruth. The chair Josiah had made hosted a different child each evening, all wanting the comfort of rocking, of being held by wood shaped with love. "Better than we imagined," she said. Josiah pulled her close. "No regrets." "How could I regret this?" Through the window, snow fell steady, covering the world clean. Inside, children breathed in sleep. The fire crackled low, and two people who'd started alone held each other in the middle of abundance they'd never expected. This was family not born but built, not perfect but whole. 8 children's voices filling the house, 8 futures to guide, 8 souls to shelter. Clara's womb might stay empty, but her arms, her home, her heart all overflowing. Next year, Josiah murmured, we'll need a bigger table. And more chairs. Bigger garden. More chickens. They planned in whispers, building tomorrow with words. Outside, wind sang through pines, and the house held strong against winter. Walls expanded not just with rooms, but with love large enough for all who needed it. 5 years had passed since the children came. The homestead sprawled now main house expanded twice. A proper barn. Bunkhouse for the older boys. Chicken coops that Margaret ran like a small empire. Tom, near 18, stood tall as Josiah, could handle a team of horses smooth as any man. The twins, now 11, had their father's gift for building, their hands sure on hammer and saw. Clara sat in the rocking chair Josiah had made that first year, watching sunset paint the mountains gold. Ruth, almost 10, read aloud to James and Peter from the McGuffey reader, her voice careful over hard words. Through the window, she could see Josiah and Tom working on something in the barn, another cradle, this one commissioned by the new school teacher who'd married last month. The rocking chair creaked its familiar rhythm. Her monthly blood had stopped coming 2 years back, early but not unexpected after all her body had endured. Dr. Paulson called it the change of life, said some women welcomed it. Clara grieved it private, the final closing of a door that had barely opened. Ma? Margaret called from the kitchen, now 14 and running the household meals with startling competence. Biscuits are ready. Ma. They all called her that now. Even Tom, who'd resisted longest. The word still caught her sometimes. Precious as water in drought. At supper, the table Josiah had built twice expanded held 10 plates. Talk flowed like water Tom's plans for his own homestead claim next year, the twins arguing about who caught the biggest fish. Ruth excited about the new books Father Miguel promised. Peter showing off a whistle he'd carved. James chattering about everything and nothing with 5-year-old enthusiasm. Got a letter, Josiah said when the meal was winding down. From Denver. Clara's hands stilled. Letters from cities rarely brought good news. Railroads coming through, not our valley, but 2 over. They're looking for supplies timber, beef, vegetables, paying good money. Tom leaned forward. We could expand the garden, run more cattle. We could, Josiah agreed, if we had more hands. I'm staying, Tom said quick. Even after I claim, we can work both places. The twins nodded. Us too, when we're old enough. Clara's throat tightened. These children who'd come as strangers were choosing to stay, to build alongside them. That night, after the young ones were abed, Clara found Josiah on the porch, studying stars. Ever think how different it all is? He asked. From what we planned. Every day. Disappointed. She considered. I wanted babies with your eyes, my mother's nose, wanted to feel life quicken and grow. That disappointment lives in me. Probably always will. But Tom has his father's integrity and your teachings. Margaret mothers everyone with my recipes and her own grace. The twins build like they were born to your tools. Ruth reads like I did, hungry for words. Peter follows you like James follows him. And James, she smiled. James got to be eldest and youngest both, protected and protector. 8 voices, Josiah murmured. 8 futures. 8 stories we're helping write. He pulled her close. That question I asked, back at the beginning, about giving me sons. I remember. I was a fool. Wrong question entirely. What should you have asked? He turned her to face him. Will you help me build a family, however it comes? Will you open your heart wide enough for whatever shape love takes? And my answer, your answer is in there. He nodded toward the house where children slept, where lamplight still showed under Tom's door as he studied the agriculture books Josiah had ordered. Your answer is 8 souls who call you Ma, who'll remember you taught them to read, to cook, to hope, who'll tell their children about the woman who took them in when the world had no room. Clara pressed her face against his chest. Feeling tears, she didn't fight. They gave us more than we gave them. That's how family works. A call came from inside James, waking from bad dreams. Clara went to him, found Ruth already there, singing soft the way Clara had taught her. The boy settled, soothed by his sister's voice, and Clara stood watching her children comforting each other, the cycle continuing. Morning brought visitors. The Svensons with news of their eldest daughter's engagement. Mrs. Holcomb, white-haired now, bringing fabric for new clothes. Sheriff Daniels, retired but still keeping order through reputation, wanting Tom's help with his horses. Fine family you've built, he told Clara while Tom saddled horses. They built themselves. We just gave them space. Takes more than space. Takes love brave enough to stretch. After the visitors left, Clara climbed to the loft, now Margaret and Ruth's domain. In the corner, wrapped careful, lay her mother's wedding dress or what remained after she'd cut baby gowns that James had worn, that Ruth had worn after, that waited for the next baby in the valley who needed them. Margaret found her there. You all right, Ma? Remembering. Sad remembering or good? Both. That's how the best memories are. Margaret sat beside her, this girl becoming woman, this daughter of her heart if not her body. Ruth and I were talking. When Tom claims his land, he'll need help. I could keep house for him, but... She hesitated. But I want to learn midwifing from Mrs. Marsh. She says I have the hands for it, the steadiness. Clara's chest swelled. You do. You have the heart for it, too. You're not disappointed. You taught me all the house things. So you could choose what to do with them. Teaching isn't about making copies. It's about giving tools. That evening, the whole family walked the property boundaries tradition now, every season's end. Tom pointed out where he'd claim, close enough to share equipment. The twins planned their future barn. Ruth gathered flowers for the table. Peter and James ran ahead, chasing rabbits that had no fear of boys who'd been taught to hunt careful, take only what was needed. At the creek, they stopped. This was where Josiah had first taught the boys to fish, where Clara had taught the girls to identify herbs, where they'd all come to cool off in summer heat or gather ice in winter depth. Story. Pa, James called. It was his favorite time, when Josiah told about the war, the journey west, the advertisement that brought Clara. But tonight Josiah shook his head. Your mother's turn. Clara looked at the faces turned toward her Tom, nearly a man. Margaret blooming into womanhood. The twins growing tall. Ruth all knobby knees and bright eyes. Peter losing baby teeth. James still small enough to climb into her lap. Once, she began, a woman thought she was broken. Doctors said so. Family said so. Maybe she believed it herself. But she was brave enough to answer an advertisement. To travel toward mountains she'd never seen. To meet a man who asked, not, can you give, but, will you try? She told them about that first winter, the empty crib, the rocking chair built with hope, about learning to shoot, to build, to survive, about the day they came 7 children needing home, finding one that needed them just as much. Some families are born, she finished. Others are built. Ours was built board by board, season by season, child by child, built from loss and found again, built from strangers becoming blood. Are we blood? Ruth asked soft. The strongest kind, Josiah answered. The kind you choose. They walked home in falling dark. James on Josiah's shoulders. Ruth holding Clara's hand. The older ones ranging ahead but always circling back. The house waited, windows golden with lamplight Margaret had left burning. Inside, evening unfolded its routine homework for the young ones. Tom and Josiah planning tomorrow's work, Margaret teaching Ruth to darn socks, the twins carving something secret for Christmas still months away. Clara moved among them, touching heads, answering questions, being Ma. Later, alone in their room, Clara and Josiah lay listening to the house settle. Above, Margaret and Ruth whispered. The boys' bunkhouse showed lamplight through the window. James slept diagonal across his small bed, limbs thrown wide in trust that the world would hold him safe. "No more babies," Clara said into the darkness. "This body's done." This body did plenty. Survived illness, birth, near death. Carried 8 children, maybe not in womb, but surely in arms. Fed them, cleaned them, taught them, loved them fearless. Will you miss it, what we thought we'd have? Sometimes, like missing snow in July, pointless but human. He found her hand. But Clara, look what we got instead. Tom, who'll carry on the work. Margaret, who'll heal others. The twins who'll build things that last. Ruth, who'll teach someday. Peter, who sees music in everything. James, who got 7 protectors and protégés both. 8 voices, Clara whispered. 8 futures. 8 pieces of our heart walking around outside our bodies. They lay quiet, listening to wind through pines, the creek running steady, the breathing of a house full of souls they'd sheltered into strength. The cradle still stood in the corner, empty but not sad. Sometimes Ruth's doll lay there. Sometimes James played with toy soldiers in it. Sometimes Clara found the barn cats had made it a bed. It had become not symbol of loss, but of readiness, ready for whatever needed holding. The rocking chair by the window caught moonlight, worn smooth by 5 years of different children rocking, reading, dreaming. Tomorrow someone would sit there, maybe Clara teaching Ruth harder words, maybe Josiah whittling while James chattered. Maybe Margaret stealing minutes with the medical book misses. Marsh had lent her. This was their legacy, not blood heirs, but something larger. 8 children who would go into the world knowing they were wanted, chosen, loved, who would tell their own children about the house in the mountains where strangers became family, where broken people built something whole. "Will you give me sons?" had been the question. "I'll give you family," had been the answer, though neither had known it then. And here in the darkness, in the house expanded by love and lumber, in the bed that had known hope and grief and hope again, 2 people held each other and knew they'd built something that would last past their bones, past their names, past memory into legend. The wind agreed, singing through pines that had watched it all, the arriving, the staying, the building, the becoming, singing the story forward into tomorrow, where 8 voices would wake and fill the house again with the sound of family, messy and loud and perfect as mountain mornings. This was home. This was theirs. This was enough, no, more than enough. This was abundance, the kind you build with your own hands, one board, one child, one chosen moment at a time. Thank you for listening to this story from the American frontier. If you're hearing this tale, we'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below, and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Josiah's journey. What touched your heart in their story of building family in unexpected ways? Your comments help us know what stories resonate with you.